Good afternoon. I'm Lee Curtis with the Tennessee State Museum, and on behalf of Humanities Tennessee, we want to welcome you to the 33rd Annual Southern Festival of Books. And Humanities Tennessee does a super job bringing this to us every year, and they are the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And yes, while we're virtual again this year, there are some amazing authors that are participating from across the country and in 3 other countries. And we are excited that we can bring them to you, even virtually. One of the benefits is that you'll be able to see any of these sessions online on YouTube. They'll be archived. And that's a great thing that we can do, in my opinion, and I'm sure everybody's that are book lovers across, no matter where you are or how you do it. When you're talking about books, there just cannot be a bad place. And remember, the festival is always free because of supporters like you and our dedicated sponsors, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, Tennessee Arts Commission, the Metro Nashville Arts Commission, Dollar General and their Literacy Foundation, Vanderbilt University, the Nashville Scene, which has done an amazing job with some great articles. I hope we'll pick one up and read some of those articles. Ingram, Bookfinity, and Parnassus Books, where you can purchase any of these books as well. So we are just very excited to bring this to you. And remember, while you're watching us, whether you're on your YouTube or on our website, you can go to the online store, the festival website, to purchase any festival merchandise or donate to the event. And we thank you. So this afternoon, I am delighted to introduce to you 3 very talented authors, Briane Broome, Anjari Enjeti, and Nichole Perkins. Here they are. And together in their collective essays, hey everyone, they're going to share with us their stories in moving and brilliant prose. Each of them are so talented, and I just want to introduce each of them, give you a little bit of background about each of them, and then we'll have each of them talk just briefly about their book, a little bit about their book, and then we'll get into conversation with them so the we can all dialogue with each other. So Briane Broome, he's a poet, a screenwriter, and author of Punch Me Up to the Gods. I have had a chance to look through this. Briane cannot wait to finish it. He's been a finalist in the mock storytelling competition and won the grand prize in the Carnegie Mellon University's Martin Luther King Writing Awards. He is a K. Leroy Irvis Fellow and instructor in the writing program at the University of Pittsburgh, where he is pursuing an MFA. He also won a Van Award from the Pittsburgh Black Media Federation for Journalism in 2019. Briane resides in Pittsburgh. Anjali, there you are. Hi, welcome. Anjali is an award-winning essayist, journalist, and author of the debut novel, The Parted Earth, as well as Southbound, essays on identity, inheritance, and social change that we will be discussing today. Her work has appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, and other amazing venues. She teaches creative writing in the MFA program at Reinhardt University and lives with her family near Atlanta. And lastly, Nichole. Hey, Nichole, you're local. So Nichole is here in Nashville, and she is a writer here from Nashville. She is a 2017 Audre Lorde Fellow at the inaugural Jack Jones Literary Arts Fest Retreat and a 2017 BuzzFeed Emerging Writers Fellow. She is also a 2016 Callahoo Creative Writing Fellow for Poetry. She formerly co-hosted Thirst Aid Kit. That sounds so cool. A podcast about pop culture and desire, and also co-host of The Waves, a podcast at Slate, which looked at news and culture through a feminist lens. It's got to be quite interesting. Her first collection of poetry, Lilith But Dark, was published by Publishing Genius in 2018. Guys, does that not sound like an amazing lineup with all of the talent collectively together? It's great. So let's get on to what we're here for, is to hear from you guys. And Briane, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind your book, and then we'll get with the others, have some discussion.
Sure. Well, I guess the inspiration behind my book is that there really isn't a whole lot to do in rehab, uh, except write. Hunting Up to the Gods is a memoir. I ended up in rehab some time ago for drug and alcohol addiction, and after I sort of stopped fighting, the reason why I was there, I started to ask myself why I was there, or what were the reasons I thought I was there, and so um, I was just up nights writing the stories that I thought were sort of like watershed moments in my life. Um, and I found that a lot of them had to do with this idea of being a man, you know, to the exclusion of all other things. Um, and that I had never lived up to this idea of being a man in the eyes of my father and in the eyes of a lot of the other men around me. And I started to sort of question what this idea of being a man was, specifically with regard to being a black man. It seems that the levels of masculinity, stoicism, not shoving down feelings, those kinds of things were stronger or felt stronger to me with regard to the black community. And um, I just started writing these stories about, from when I was little to, I think probably pretty much right before I went to rehab, my addiction, my feelings of never being able to find a place to fit in because I felt, racism from the population at large, and then I felt homophobia from the Black community, and I found that it resonated with a lot of Black people, a lot of Black queer people, and so yeah, that's basically what the book is about.
Wow. And here it is again. We'll get into more of it later. I've already started reading it. I have not finished. But you really talk about a lot of things that took a lot of courage, Brian, and we want to hear from you about that, a little bit
Oh yeah,
later.
I embarrassed myself real bad.
No, 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 no. It takes courage. And this is great because just knowing how many other people that you're connecting to and relating to, because it's a lot of it is raw, and I just thought it was really great that you did that. Anjali, why don't you tell us a little bit about Southbound here, to the kind of essays on identity, inheritance, and social change. I also picked up, started reading in this, and couldn't put it down either. Very insightful. Tell us a little bit about the inspiration for you behind writing Southbound.
Thank you so much, Lee. Thank you so much for having me here. I appreciate this conversation. Um, I would say that probably one of the earliest kernels that became Southbound was sort of my question, which is who gets to be Southern?
Ah,
I lived in several states until I was 10 years old when my family relocated from a suburb of Detroit down to Chattanooga, Tennessee in the early
mhm.
1980s. And it was my first experience really of being in the South and living in the South. Chattanooga back then was a very small community. It was a very heavily evangelical Christian community. It was largely white, but there were certainly some Black folks, but it was fairly segregated. But there were not a whole lot of brown people living in Chattanooga. My family's a mixed race family. There were my father's from India. There were some Indian families, some Latinx families, but really it was predominantly white and Black. And so what I found out when I moved to Chattanooga was that the first of all, I was the first brown person that many of my schoolmates had met in their entire lives. They'd not seen anybody Asian, any Asians, not many Hispanics. So I started trying to understand what it meant to be from the South. What does that look like? What are the stereotypes that we have of people who live in the South? Graduated from high school in Chattanooga, spent some time in North Carolina, and then I spent the next 12 years in the Midwest, but primarily outside of Philly until I moved back down to the Atlanta area about 14 years ago. And I chose to move back south because I love the South. I hope to never leave the South. I feel and identify as Southern, but I still found myself sort of encountering these assumptions about what it means to be Southern and who is Southern. And interestingly, in a state like Georgia, which is something like 45% BIPOC right now. I mean, it's really only 55% white, white non-Hispanic, according to the latest census information. But I'm also very politically active, been doing sort of progressive work for the last couple of decades, but the last 5 years especially. I'm an electoral organizer. And so I've been bumping up more assumptions about what people think of the South socio-politically, culturally. And so that sort of was the germination for the essay collection. I wanted to write about specifically how identity shapes activism, how it shapes social change work, how this sort of organically rises from various communities, and how these communities, in particular in the South, don't necessarily look like preconceived notions that we have of Southerners. So that was sort of my taking off point for the book.
Interesting. Wow. We're looking forward to getting into more of that with you too. And Nichole, I love the title of this book. This is great. Don't you? All three of us all agree, Nichole. We all agree. Sometimes I trip on how happy we could be. I love it. What a great title. We want to hear from you a little bit about, of course, I want to know the title, the book, the inspiration for you, and then we'll get into some more discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great.
I'm really happy to be here. This has been a dream of mine to be a part of the Southern Festival of Books for a very long time. I am born and raised in Nashville. I'm actually living in Brooklyn right now, so I'm coming to you from Brooklyn.
Okay.
But I am a Nashvilleian to the heart. But the title, Sometimes I Trip on How Happy We Could Be, comes from my favorite Prince song, If I Was Your Girlfriend, from the Sign of the Times album, which came out in 1987. And I think it is officially my favorite Prince album. You know, he's got a lot of work, so it takes a long time to figure out what your favorite is. But so that's where the title comes from. And I wanted to write the book because I did not see a lot of essay collections or memoirs from people who were just like regular people. I think a lot of times when we see memoirs, they are people who are celebrities and things like that. And so at the time when I started writing the book, I was reading Roxane Gay's Bad Feminist, Samantha Irby's humorous essay collections like Meaty, and then No Thank You, stuff like that. So, and Mindy Kaling's work. So I was just like, oh, I felt like they were clearing a path for me. Not to say that I am anywhere near as funny as Mindy Kaling or Samantha Irby, or even as solid a writer as Roxane Gay, but I still felt like there's precedent for what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do was write a book that showed the diversity of Black womanhood, that showed a Black woman who was a Black girl in the South who was trying to come to terms with her sexuality and her body and expressing herself through pop culture and sex. So there are chapters on Kermit and Miss Piggy and how their relationship is actually not so sweet, like once you get down to it and you look at it from the eyes of an adult, and how that relationship mirrored a part of my childhood, a part of, seeing some stuff through, from my parents. There's also a chapter on Niles Crane from the show Frasier, because I love I titled the chapter "I Love Niles Crane," I think, because I love that character. I talk about what it means to have grown up in Nashville, in the middle of Tennessee State, Fisk University, Meharry Medical College, as a Black girl, and seeing all, the wonders of HBCUs, and then going on to attend my own HBCU in New Orleans. there's a lot of stuff in there. Bones, the TV show Bones. There's also some heavy stuff. The book opens up with me talking about the term fast, which is what a lot of young Black girls get called anytime they express some sort of burgeoning, sexuality, or even just because they're sitting next to a boy, they get called fast, that kind of thing. And what that does to you when you are blamed for the natural course of humanity, things like that. So it's got a lot of stuff in it, some humorous, some very serious. And I wanted people, especially women, especially Black women, especially Black Southern women, to see that they were not alone in their particular journey. So that was the heart and all behind the book.
Wow. Well, I have to say on the, wanted to show one of the quotes on the back of the book. Jasmine Ward, who is author of Seeing Unburied Seeing, she writes, and I love what she wrote about each of you and each of your books. Great comments. But this one, I really want to read this to everyone. A love letter to the Black girls we were, to the Black women we are, and to the brave new beings we are growing up to be. And I thought that was really interesting the way, Jasmine said that, talking about the collection of your essays, too, as a love letter, to who we were, who we're going to be, who we, and as we're coming out. And I thought that was really, really interesting way in looking at what you've written. And when you talk about all the characters, celebrities, topics, and I'm an ordinary person. Most celebrities write memoirs. What was one of the hurdles? What was the biggest hurdle that you felt that you came across as you wrote this?
Definitely figuring out how much of other people's stories to tell, especially where they, obviously where they intersected with mine, and how much background I could give, especially if it's background that I was not present for, right? Because I definitely want to be respectful, but I also have my story to tell, right? And so I had to figure out the best way of talking about, that family dirty laundry without, I don't know that I could have saved anyone from being uncomfortable, but I definitely had to figure out, what was relevant to my story and what I was talking about. Because that's actually one of the things that my mom told me when I first told her that I was writing the book, that I had, sold it and had a book deal. She was just like, well, how much of your childhood are you going to talk about? And that was her very soft way of asking, how much of my business are you going to tell? So I wanted to be mindful of that. But, we did not grow up in a vacuum. We were not like this little plant that gets raised in a greenhouse someplace, right? We have all this stuff that shapes us, and that that comes from people who were shaped before we even came along. So all of that stuff was very important, but it was really difficult. And it was also very difficult. I talk a lot about sex and sexual things in the book, and one of the things that has struck me since the book has come out and people have dropped reviews and comments and tagged me and things, it's just so many people are scandalized by the things that I said, and I honestly tried my best to tone down a lot of that stuff. So to hear people being like, "Oh my gosh," even for the stuff that I toned down, it does have me second guessing myself, second guessing the next things that I want to write, because I'm just like, are people not ready for me? So I've been kind of going on a little spiral of, I thought I was not revealing that much, but clearly I showed more than I thought. And do I want to keep showing that? So.
Wow. That's great hearing you talk about that. And I think probably as a writer, when you start writing, you don't realize how much you are expressing more than you can ever know, more than what's on paper, because even though you know it, we don't know it as the reader. That's why it seems so much more to the reader, because you already know it and you feel like it's old story, old shoe, old hat, and we don't. This is just enlightening and huge to the reader. So, Briane, I want to get with you on the book Punch Me to the Gods. Looking at some of the back of the many, many great comments, this one struck me from your book. And I want to quote from Sapphire, who is author of Push and the Kid. So I don't know if you remember that quote or not, but this is what he says about Punch Me to the Gods. Exquisite, a true work of art. Not one of the best new books I've read this year, but quite simply the best. So he is saying that this is the best, not one of them, but the best. So that really says a lot. I have heard of Sapphire. I looked him up. I looked up some of the other authors. What a great thing. And I think that we talk about the courage that it took for you to talk about, I think you grew up in Ohio. Is that correct, Briane? And a lot of hurdles.
Yes.
So let's talk about some of the hurdles that you faced as you were writing Punch Me Up to the Gods.
Well, like Nichole said, you kind of have to decide. In the beginning, I didn't care. I was like, I'm going to tell everybody's business. I don't care. I have to get all this stuff out. I was looking at it more as a cathartic, journey for myself. And then I had a conversation with my mom, and I was interviewing her for the book, and she said something that struck me. She said, I'll tell as much as I can without hurting anybody that I care about or cared about. And that made me think. So then I sort of started taking some, specific things out, things that I found out later probably they wouldn't have added to the book at all. Wouldn't have enhanced the story for the reader. They were just me, being angry or being hurt or feeling dejected. So, that was a hurdle. And then, just embarrassing myself, looking like a fool. But we have all looked like a fool at times. And, I put all of it out there. And then like the day before publication, I realized, oh crap, like people are actually going to read this. Oh my God, what am I going to do now? But, I found that the more open that I was about things, the more people that I found who related to what I was saying. I've been really shocked because when I wrote this book, I thought this is a book for, Black boys. This is a book to tell Black boys that you don't have to be this thing that everybody keeps telling that you have to be. But since the book has come out, I've heard from people from all different walks of life saying, I experienced the same thing. The circumstances were different. I am a white woman or whatever, but I had this exact same feeling, when I was growing up. So, that was a hurdle. And then just, to reckon with some of these things myself, to reckon with, my own addiction, my own horrible behavior toward others. That was hard to sometimes put down on paper and then read back to myself. But in the end, I'm glad that I did it. I feel unburdened to some extent. But, I also feel still pretty ashamed of some of the things, I've done to people and that I've said and the way that I live my life in active addiction. And so I look at the book as a way for me maybe to move forward and try to be a better person in general, throughout the rest of throughout the rest of my life.
Wow, that's pretty powerful, Briane. That really is. And again, I think when you start to write about, reading through what you were talking about in the book and the challenges and the hurt and some things and trying to talk to other Black boys and this is who it's for. I think it's for more than just when you were thinking this is going to be a book for Black boys. It's a book for everyone. It's a book for everyone to read. And I think we can all learn so much from it. And you've really gone through a lot with that. One of the things here, it's cleverly framed around Gwendolyn Brooks' poem, We Real Cool, that iconic and loving, ode to Black boyhood. What can you tell us about the connection between that poem and your book?
I was writing the book, and I didn't really know Gwendolyn Brooks' "We Real Cool" poem. I discovered it. I discovered it myself. Nobody else had heard of it before. No, I found it, and I was reading the lines, and I thought, this is what I'm writing about. We real cool. We left school. We lurk late. I mean, I thought I could write stories for each one of these lines. And then I was like, it's brilliant. I'm brilliant. I am brilliant. She's talking about Black masculinity. Look at what I've discovered. But then I found out, that Bell Hooks, the writer Bell Hooks, discovered it years before I did. She has a whole book called "We Real Cool: Black Men and Masculinity." And then I tried to read her book, and I didn't understand any of it. It was so smart, and I'm not that smart. She's a genius.
I think you
And
are.
I thought, well, I'll just tell my stories, to the lines of this poem, because I think what Gwendolyn Brooks is talking about are the sort of, rites of passage that, Black boys have to go through. Black children in general don't get a long childhood. I think Black boys and Black girls are seen as adults far earlier than their white counterparts. And the story behind the poem is she was walking by a pool hall, and she saw, 7 young boys basically inside the pool hall doing very manly things. And I thought, this is the kind of thing I've been up against, my whole life. This show of masculinity, this show of being a man. And so that's the connection. I thought, this poem has to be in the book. There's nothing I can do about it. It's been, I was like the heavens opened up and spoke to me. Like, it has to involve this poem. And that's how it wound up in the book.
And I think did that help you search for the words that you were looking for, that you wanted to express, that you have done so well in this book with your words?
I think it just clicked. I think, the words that I was writing were kind of already there. And, I found this puzzle piece, that, wasn't necessarily missing, but just fit so perfectly. Like, how could I ignore it? So her poem didn't necessarily help me write, but it was just the perfect fit for what I was trying to say. She said it far shorter, in fewer lines, but I knew that I wanted to involve this brilliant poem in the work that I was doing.
How many years did it take for you, Briane, to realize, this started as you were a young boy, to realize you wanted to write this book? Had you pondered it for several years, or did you just decide, I've got to write this? Was it something that you thought about for a long time?
I did not start out to write a book at all. Literally, it's like I said, I ended up going to rehab, and I didn't want to be there. And they stuck me in the room with this guy who I wish I could remember him and thank him, because he snored so loud that I was just up all night. And they gave you like a pen and pad in rehab to write down your various, epiphanies or whatever. And since I was up and his CPAP machine had fallen off and he was, snoring, I was just writing, these stories. I was in there for quite a while. And when I got out of rehab, I was afraid to go anywhere because I was afraid that I would relapse. So I just stayed in my house and I continued to write. And when I started to go out again, I started doing open mics. I would do the Moth, and I would do these open poetry mic night things. And one night after I got off stage, a very nice woman came up and she said, "Hi, I would like to be your agent." And I didn't know what the hell that meant. And so I was like, "Sure." And she said she was a literary agent. And she asked me if I had anything that I was writing. And I was like, I got all these stories, that I wrote in rehab and after rehab. And that's where the book started to take shape. I didn't go into it with an idea of writing a book. I just wound up with a book. And the whole time I was like, nobody's going to buy this. Like, nobody's going to read this. And I found out a couple weeks ago that I am a finalist for the Kirkus Prize. Like
Wow.
that is, that's a glass slipper, like Cinderella story. Like, that's crazy to me. From where it started to where the book is now. It's crazy, absolutely crazy.
That's amazing. Wow. And Anjali, Southbound, Essays on Identity, Inheritance, and Social Change. What a great book, too. And I have to read this. I love this on the back. This is from Lacey Johnson, who is author of the Reckonings. And she says, Anjali Enjeti's Southbound is a potent tonic for our lives, kind of ambitious in its scope and refreshing in its candor. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this. Obviously, you've combined, from identity, inheritance, social change, that all kind of links together, obviously, in your essays. But tell us a little bit about the inspiration again, and more about the book and the hurdles you might have faced.
So when I initially started writing the collection of essays, it kind of like Brian, it wasn't necessarily that I thought of it as a book at first, but what I initially was doing was sort of retelling um, instances of trauma, particularly racialized trauma. And after I sort of got all of that out of my system through the process of drafts and revisions and really thinking about what I wanted to do, and then connecting it to organizing work and social change work, what I started realizing was that it wasn't traumas that were sort of the inspiration for the social change work, but really my complicity in the systems of power that marginalize communities. And that was kind of a daunting realization for me. It wasn't, it's not particularly joyous to write about things. Brian, you mentioned writing about things that you were ashamed of. That's kind of what I ended up doing in this collection. I write specifically about instances where I upheld white supremacy, and I write about it in a way that's very, very honest, in a way that, Nichole mentioned having some readers tell her that about even the parts that she toned down, that, wow, I can't believe you said that. I had readers tell me, well, but you were only 19 when that happened, when you were only 21 when that happened. And it's kind of the point. I mean, the very, very sort of subtle ways that even though I was racially abused, the very subtle ways that I decided to align myself with whiteness. And they're not subtle, right? I use that in quotes because nothing is really subtle when it comes to racism, right? I mean, you are either buying into this system of power, or you are very actively rejecting it. And I was not actively rejecting it. And, I tell stories, for example, about, when I was 18 or 19 years old, and I spent much of my formative years in Chattanooga, and I didn't get invited. I didn't get an invitation to the city's renowned debutante ball, which was basically, a parade of whiteness, to put it bluntly. And when I first wrote that essay, right, it was about me being really pissed off. But then what I realized was that I was part of the problem, that I was aspiring to something that I should have just condemned from day one, right? I mean, I think very much my desires in life were for whiteness. Not saying that I ever wanted to be actually a white person. That's not what I mean. I've never desired white skin. But the very goal of my life was to be accepted and to be heralded, and to be seen in ways where I was, smart and funny and, whatever, what have you, was very much based on whiteness. And so I had to really unpack a lot of very uncomfortable situations where I made the wrong decision that caused harm, right? And write about these things that were embarrassing and uncomfortable and still are. But it's the complicity and my acknowledge of the complicity that I think has helped make me a better organizer. Because if it was just the trauma, that wouldn't have done it. It was me realizing how at fault I was, because when you see the way that you are complicit and you realize the way that you are really weaponizing your privilege, and in this particular case, it was my brown skin privilege in against communities. You go through a process so that you start really then have an authentic perspective to change the world in ways that empower communities that are not empower. And it really helps you realize, that your roles instead as a facilitator and a helper, and not necessarily the champion, not necessarily the person who is expressing very openly and visibly and loudly their own experiences, but is really taking a back seat and shining the spotlight on other people, and other communities that are most affected. So the hurdle was tough for me. It took draft after draft after draft for me to really have to sit with the fact that I did bad things. I mean, it wasn't easy for me. And it took months of revision to sort of really reckon with the ways that I had thrown other people under the bus, right? And I hope that helps other people see the ways that they are complicit, because I'm not really doing anything like openly or blatantly racist in the book. I am doing stuff that some people might not see as being racist, but they should. They should. And so that's kind of, that was very much a part of my process, was really realizing that writing about my trauma and that being the channel for doing social change work was really just painting me in a good light and being disingenuous as to the forces that were really at power in my life. And really needing to sort of unpack and interrogate the ways that I uphold systems and continue to uphold systems today that make me actually part of the problem and not always part of the solution.
It's interesting. One of the things, Anjali, that I remember reading in the beginning of your book, from the very beginning in one of your first chapters, was kind of the questions you said. Questions about your identity. I'm pretty sure this was you. Questions about your identity have echoed in your mind for decades. And that really struck when I started reading your book. And that was one of the first things. It was one of the beginning of the first chapter, the first essay. And I thought, what a start. What a way to do that, because you're challenging your own mind, and you're having to deal with that echoing, who am I? What am I? Where are we? Kind of our identity. Briane and Nichole, can you talk about also to how that writing each of your memoirs, the books, the good, the bad, the funny, the not so great, how it has shaped your identity?
I want to say something. I want to say something to Nichole.
Okay.
So the last time we were together in a situation like this, you read a piece from the book about a man you were dating very briefly. He was a nature guy.
Yeah,
right?
the hippie. Yeah.
The hippie. And I was like, I have dated that same guy. And so I immediately went out and got your book. I was like, this is amazing. I mean, I just wanted to say, such amazing writing. I recommended it to my friend Disha Filia, who wrote The Secret Lives of Church Ladies.
Yes, which is an incredible book.
Which she bought.
I have to write that one down.
I just love that this connection is happening. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
But yeah, I'm going to let you go ahead and answer the question, but I wanted to fit that little bit of a
Briane, that's great. Thank you.
For your book.
Thank you. As far as how writing the book affected my identity, it made me realize that I have always been who I am. And it's just that, these things take a little time to get a label, I guess. So, I look back at like the celebrity crushes I had as a child, because I was watching TV with my sister, who is about 7 years older than me. So I was probably watching stuff that I should not have been watching, which is not to say that she was watching anything super inappropriate, but still, it was just, I'm 6 watching Brat Pack stuff, and maybe that wasn't the best for me to be watching necessarily. But anyway, so but the men that I crushed on as a child, and I didn't even know what a crush was, right? I just knew that I wanted to keep looking at them on screen.
Mhm.
Those are the same men I pretty much am attracted to now, not just in celebrities, but like in general, in real life or whatever. My passion for reading and the stuff that I like to read, it's still all there. So it's just going back in time and realizing, oh, that was me establishing my personality. I said in another interview recently that I've always been somebody who has been very careful about who gets my time and attention. And when I was younger, again, in the South, that's considered being rude, or sometimes you're supposed to be warm and nice to everybody. Everyone is supposed, you're supposed to let everybody hug and kiss on you when you're a kid. And there's some people that would just be like, no, that's okay. I'm going to go over here and read my book. And, you get called antisocial. You get called all these different types of names. And now everyone's like, boundaries. This is my boundary. You are violating my boundary. You do not deserve my time. And it's just like, I have been trying to do that all of my life.
And we're always apologizing when
Yes.
we need to be apologizing.
Yes.
I read something on that earlier this morning, and it really hit home. I thought, we all do that. We need to stop that. Briane, talk to us about a little bit. We've only got a few minutes left, but changing your identity. This obviously, you were about 7 years old in this picture.
I was 32 in that picture. A lot of people don't know that.
A little blurry. It's great.
No, I think that's a kindergarten
As a young
picture.
child.
Yeah. Just for me, I'm just, I did a lot of, Anjali, sorry, was just talking about, being embarrassed about the things you've done in the past. I have your book. I can't wait to read it specifically now after talking to you, like, about just admitting to doing wrong and how hard that is, especially for somebody to read. To give it out for public consumption and say, these are the mistakes that I have made. Can you admit to making mistakes too? I think now we're in a time where everybody wants to be perfect, for good reasons and for not so good reasons, right? And I appreciate, what you've just said, Anjali, about just saying, I did wrong, and this is the ways I'm going to try to do right. I think that's what's changed in me, because before I think I did wrong and I just justified my wrong. I just found ways to skirt it and to not be responsible for it, and to not listen to other people when they were telling me that I was doing the wrong thing. My self-preservation was the most important thing. And so I hope that that's what's changed in me. A little bit more of an ability to listen, and to not be afraid to do wrong again,
Right.
and to try things, and to be told you're doing wrong. I mean, that's kind of what life is. I spent a long time being a character, or playing a character for whomever my audience was. Depending upon who the audience was, that's who I was. I think what's changed for me is that I am no longer willing to do that, and I try not to do that. So yeah, I think this book being in the world is what's changed that for me.
This puts you on the right track. I think that clearly put you on that right track, and we want to read more from each of you. And Anjali, tell us a little bit more about how you think it changed you, Southbound, your essays, on identity and inheritance, social change. Tell us briefly. We've just got a very little time left, but we want to hear from you on that too.
So I think I spent most of my life really, almost up until I started drafting the first essays of this book, very imbalanced in that I sort of let other people define who I was. I didn't have sort of this internalized self-concept about identity. You referenced, kind of the prologue in the book where I asked the questions, where are you? What are you? Where are you from? Right? Where are you from? I mean, I still hear that all the time, just, randomly from strangers, usually from white people. Where are you from? What are you? Where are you from?
That's what we do.
Wanting to know sort of a complete breakdown of my racial and ethnic background and my, national origin, everything. So, and so I think I let those questions for so many decades shape who I was. And then I realized I didn't have to do that. I could reject that and I could actually define that myself. And I'm still a work in progress, but once I sort of changed my mindset and came from a place of agency and empowerment instead of sort of letting other people put me into boxes and categories, I think that's something that I've been able to sort of work through in the process of the book.
Wow. Well, each of you, these are all connected. All three of these books, memoirs, essays, encourage you to get them. You can go online to Parnassus Books, go online to the Southern Festival of Books, their website. I've started in each of them and they're amazing, but they all have a strong connection, telling your story. Nichole, Anjali, Briane, each of you have an amazing story. I'm still going to trip on how happy I think we could be, tripping on that. I want to be punched up to the gods, and I want to know about the, essays on, identity, and social inheritance and the change. These are all so important, but I think each of you all intertwine with each other. And we could probably talk another 45 minutes. Each of you are amazingly talented. Reading your bios, I was just so impressed, as I know our audience is too. So encourage our audience to get these books too. We appreciate your time with us this afternoon, Briane, Anjali, and Nichole. We hope to see more of you, hear from you more for the Southern Festival of Books. We want to thank our audience for joining us today. And remember, you can enjoy any of these sessions. You can watch this again on YouTube. They'll be archived. And don't forget to shop or donate to Humanities Tennessee. And we thank them for bringing each of you to us. So we want to say goodbye and thank you again for your time, Briane, Anjali, and Nichole.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
Lee.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anjali. Thank you,
Yes,
Nichole.
yes.